The Frozen Whisper. The town of Eben Hollow was nestled deep in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. Winters there were brutal and unforgiving, with snowstorms so fierce they could bury houses and winds so sharp they seemed to cut through bone. But the townsfolk endured, as they always had, until the winter of the Whispering Blizzard, the winter no one dared speak of. It began with the wind. Not the usual howling gales that swept through the valley, but a low, keening wail that seemed almost human. It crept through the town one icy evening, curling around chimneys and seeping through the cracks indoors. The sound was faint at first, easily dismissed as a trick of the storm, but by midnight it grew louder, filling the air with an eerie cadence, as though the wind were whispering secrets to anyone who would listen. Emma Northwood, the town's apothecary, was one of the first to notice. Sitting by her fire, she paused as the wind's cry pierced through the walls of her cottage. It sounded like voices, faint, fragmented phrases in a language she couldn't understand. She shook her head, dismissing it as fatigue. Winters were always busy for her, treating frostbite and warding off the illnesses that came with the cold. But then she heard it clearly. "Emma, help us." Her blood ran cold. The voice was distant, muffled, yet unmistakably her name. She bolted upright, clutching the edge of her chair. Trembling, she approached the window and peered into the swirling snow outside. There was nothing but white. No figures, no shapes, just the endless storm. The next morning, the town was abuzz with similar stories. Farmers, shopkeepers, even the children spoke of the voices in the wind. Some heard cries for help, others heard laughter, and a few heard their own names called out in despair. Father Cullen, the town's priest, declared it a test of faith, urging everyone to pray and remain indoors. But the whispers persisted. By the second week, the whispers began to take a toll. People stopped sleeping, their faces drawn and pale. A once close-knit community became fractured by paranoia. Some accused their neighbors of bringing the curse upon them. Others claimed to see shadowy figures moving through the snow. Livestock began to die mysteriously, their frozen bodies found in the morning, eyes wide with terror. Emma, determined to find answers, delved into the town's history. She scoured old journals and records in the library, looking for any mention of such an event. And then she found it. A tattered journal belonging to a man named Elias Grent, dated nearly a century ago. "The storm," it whispers, one entry read. "It calls to us by name. Those who answer do not return." Another passage detailed a group of villagers who had tried to confront the source of the whispers. They had ventured into the mountains, following the voices. None were ever seen again. The journal ended abruptly, with a final chilling note. "The wind remembers." That night, Emma's resolve wavered as the whispers grew more insistent. They seemed to press against her windows, slither under her door. She could no longer ignore the distinct voices among the cacophony. "Emma," they pleaded, "join us. It's so cold." Unable to bear it any longer, Emma bundled herself in her warmest clothes and lit a lantern. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she felt compelled to act, to find whatever was haunting her town. The storm was fierce as she stepped outside, the snow whipping against her face. But the voices guided her. They led her to the outskirts of Eben Hollow, to an old trail that wound into the mountains. It was a path no one dared tread in winter, but Emma pressed on, the whispers growing louder with every step. Her lantern flickered in the gale, casting eerie shadows on the snow. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the blinding storm. Eventually, she came upon a clearing where the wind seemed to stop. In the silence, Emma saw them. Figures stood in the snow, dozens of them, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes hollow. Their mouths moved in unison, but no sound emerged. They were the missing, she realized, the villagers who had answered the whispers. They stared at her, their expressions a mix of sorrow and longing. "Help us," they mouthed. Emma stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and from the center of the clearing, a towering figure emerged. It was humanoid, but its form was made entirely of ice and snow, its eyes glowing a piercing blue. The whispers emanated from it, swirling like 1,000 voices trapped within. "Leave," the creature said, its voice like cracking ice. "Or join them." Emma turned and ran, the storm roaring back to life around her. The voices screamed, a cacophony of despair that chased her all the way back to the village. The next day, the storm broke, leaving a clear, frigid sky, but the damage was done. Several more villagers were gone, their doors left ajar, their footprints leading into the wilderness. Emma warned the survivors, sharing what she had seen. They listened, wide-eyed and trembling, but no one dared act. The winter passed, and with spring came a fragile sense of normalcy. But the whispers had left their mark. Ebon Hollow grew quieter, its population dwindling as families moved away, unable to endure the memory of that cursed season. To this day, travelers who pass through the valley speak of the whispering blizzard. On the coldest nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the voices calling out, desperate and cold. And if you listen too closely, you might find yourself drawn into the mountains where the snow remembers. The Lake of Silent Souls. In the remote wilderness of Black Hollow Forest, hidden beneath a perpetual shroud of mist, lay a lake known as Stillwater. The water was unnaturally calm, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the gnarled trees that loomed over its edges. No birds sang near Stillwater, no fish swam beneath its depths. The only sound was the faint rustle of the wind through the reeds, and even that seemed subdued, as if afraid to disturb the silence. The villagers in the nearby hamlet of Pinecrest rarely spoke of the lake. When they did, it was in hushed tones, warning travelers to steer clear. They told stories of people who ventured too close and were never seen again. They called it Cursed, a place where lost souls were trapped beneath the surface, waiting for new victims to join them. One autumn evening, a group of university students arrived in Pinecrest. They were young, brash, and eager for adventure, dismissing the villagers' warnings as mere superstition. Among them was Eleanor, a budding journalist who saw the lake as an opportunity to uncover a story that could launch her career. Her friends, Alex, Mark, and Sophie, were less interested in folklore and more in the thrill of exploring the forbidden. "It's just a lake," Mark said as they unpacked their gear at a small, rundown cabin they'd rented. "How scary can it be?" "We'll find out tomorrow," Elena replied, her eyes gleaming with determination. She spent the evening poring over local legends she'd found online, jotting down notes and theories. One tale in particular caught her attention, the story of a woman named Lila, who had drowned in the lake centuries ago. They said her spirit lingered, dragging the living down to share her watery grave. The next morning, the group set out for Stillwater. The mist thickened as they approached, clinging to their skin like a cold sweat. When they reached the shore, the lake's eerie stillness struck them. Not a single ripple disturbed its surface, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. "Creepy," Sophie muttered, clutching her jacket tighter. Elena set up her camera and began filming. "This is perfect," she said. "The atmosphere, the mystery, it's exactly what we need." Alex, ever the skeptic, picked up a stone and hurled it into the lake. The splash echoed unnaturally loud, and the ripples seemed to spread slower than they should. "See? Just water," he said with a smirk. But as the ripples faded, the group noticed something strange. The stone had disappeared. The lake's surface was smooth again, as if the disturbance had been erased. Mark frowned. "Okay, that's weird. Probably some natural phenomenon," Alex shrugged, though his voice lacked conviction. As the day wore on, Elena insisted on exploring further. They followed the shore, stopping to film and take notes. The mist seemed to thicken around them, muffling their voices and footsteps. Eventually, they came across an old rowboat tied to a rotting dock. The wood was blackened with age, but it looked seaworthy enough. "Let's take it out," Elena suggested. "Are you serious?" Sophie asked, her voice tinged with fear. "We came all this way," Elena argued. "We need to see what's out there." Reluctantly, the group climbed into the boat and pushed off. The oars creaked as Alex and Mark rowed, the sound echoing across the lake. They drifted into the center, where the water seemed impossibly dark, as if it stretched endlessly downward. "Let's stop here," Elena said, pulling out her camera. She began filming again, panning across the desolate landscape. Suddenly, Sophie gasped. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Alex asked, glancing nervously over the side. "Something moved," she said, pointing to the water. They all peered into the depths, but there was nothing. Just the same, impenetrable blackness. Nightfall came quickly, and with it a chilling realization. The mist had thickened to the point where they couldn't see the shore. "We'll head back," Alex said, his voice strained. But as they turned the boat, a sound stopped them. A faint melodic humming drifted across the water. "Is someone singing?" Mark whispered. The humming grew louder, closer. The water began to ripple, and the boat rocked gently. Then, a hand broke the surface, slender, pale, and dripping with blackened water. It gripped the edge of the boat, followed by another, and then a face emerged. It was a woman, her hair streaming like tendrils of seaweed, her eyes hollow and black. Her lips moved, but the humming seemed to come from everywhere. "Lila," Elena whispered, frozen in terror. The woman smiled, a cold, lifeless grin, and pulled herself up. The boat tipped violently, and the group screamed as they plunged into the icy water. The cold was unbearable, seizing their limbs and stealing their breath. Beneath the surface, the darkness was alive. Faces appeared, pale and ghostly, their mouths open in silent screams. Hands reached out, pulling, dragging. Elena struggled, her lungs burning, but the more she fought, the deeper she was pulled. The last thing she saw was Lila, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Days later, the villagers found the rowboat drifting near the shore. Inside were Elena's camera and a single sodden notebook. The footage was blurred, distorted, but the last frame showed Lila's face, her lips forming the words, "Join us." No one ever ventured near Stillwater again.